Okay, we're already at the halfway stage of a series that so far we covered last week. We've been really enjoying, but again, we were kind of had some hopes that we were hoping out for this episode. So it's time to discuss the one and only Loki episode 3. And to do that, as always, we have the one man I call whenever I need to discuss all things Marvel. It is the one, the only. Well, that's an anticlimax.
Big two.
I'm leaving it in. I'm leaving it in. No, it's just
You
that
have to, yeah.
people could see, like, if you tee it up like that, that's it. It
Famously
gets left
mentioned,
in.
right? I always wanted to make Botchamania, never had a chance.
There you go. So we may get included for that one. Let's see. Hopefully it works this time. It is the one, the only Dan, 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 Dan. Dan line up. Whoa! Oh, thank God. I thought everything was broken again. We're going to have another episode get lost. Dan, how are you? We're now halfway through Loki. Are you ready? We're going to be finishing it probably in no time. How are you feeling at the halfway stage? We'll discuss the episode as we go, but like just general sentiment on your side.
Big things are coming. I really feel like that this is going to be the bridge into the exciting part that we've been building up so long for. So, I don't like. I know a lot of the episodes been named, but I'd like to issue a name for the sixth episode, which is Temporal Loom Go Boom, and I think that's what it's
Nice. Okay. Interesting. I can't wait to discuss the rest of it. And we're going to get into episode 3. But before we do, as always, we're going to do a spoiler warning. Guys, we are going to be talking about all things Loki. We're going to be talking about all things MCU. We're going to be talking about even we may touch on the comics and the likes. But again, it is called Into the Spoilerverse. So tread carefully. Again, we don't know what's going to happen in this series. So there's no way of us spoiling there. And even if we are talking about the likes of comics and giving you some backstory, the goal is to enhance, but not to ruin any plot line, so you can enjoy that content for yourselves, even if you haven't consumed it yet. But guys, before we get into the episode itself, we're going to set the scene and put us back into the mindset for episode 3, as we always do with our alternate recap. And we begin with Renslayer traveling to Chicago in 1868 to find Miss Minutes living broken and destitute in a barn, because of course OnlyFans hasn't been invented yet. You need to listen to last week's recap if you haven't already to get that. I'm not just a weird perv. Miss Minutes tells Renslayer to drop a package in a window, which is presumably for Baby Kang, who fortunately yet hasn't been cancelled. Back in the TVA, OB explains that why they're all gonna die, and I just take his word for it rather than trying to recap it. Loki and Mobius travel to the Chicago Fair in 1893 in a branch timeline where they track down Renslayer, Miss Minutes, and a Kang variant in the form of Victor Timely, where he's a con man selling futuristic time machine technology. Where they found Kang originally at the end of time, they find him here. What some consider the end of the MCU, aka the Ant-Man Quantumania credits. On a Ferris wheel, while Baron's Timely has ripped off Pursue, Loki tries to convince Timely to come back to the TVA, but Sylvie shows up attempting to murder him. They fight as Miss Minutes goes into ghost mode to clear the fair. Renslayer seizes the opportunity to whisk Timely away, and despite seeing two Norse god variants of each other battling over whether he should live or die moments beforehand, he immediately takes her back to his room trying to bang her. I'm like, okay, you gotta respect the hustle, Kang. He never misses an opportunity. They're discovered after Renslayer and Miss Minutes explain the stakes to him, so escape on a boat to his lab in Wisconsin, where they explain to him that they delivered the TVA manual in 1868. Miss Minutes is getting jealous, but Timely only has eyes for Ravonna, or so we think, as he, like every major industry today, chooses artificial intelligence over those pesky humans and ditches Renslayer in the dead of night. Back in the lab, Miss Minutes shows Timely why pay pigs put down their hard-earned money online, and asks why he never gave her a body. Sure enough, he does only last minutes. It's not just a tagline, my friends, and disposes of her by effectively just putting the laptop tray down. Ravonna shows up threatening to prune him, while Loki, Mobius, and Sylvie also somehow knew where to find them because the plot required it. Sylvie gets Timely at knife point, but he's got a cute stutter, so she feels sorry for him and lets Loki and Mobius take him back to the TVA, and then shows mercy to Renslayer and Miss Minutes too, but sends them back to the end of time to chill with the remains of He Who Remains. Not gonna lie, I assumed that working in McDonald's serving overweight Americans all day would make you more homicidal, but there you go. And ladies and gentlemen, that was episode 3 of season 2 of Loki 1893. Dan, we're going to get into the specifics and kind of our theories and whatnot as we go. But first off, just general thoughts and vibes on episode 3. Did this manage to keep the momentum of the first 2 episodes, which obviously we were huge fans of?
It has in a way because it's a very self-contained singular adventure sort of story, like the fact that they're in 1893 Chicago and they're just going through like this single adventure to get Victor Connolly back to use his aura to open the blast doors. But as much as I enjoyed it, and it was like this real vaudeville, old timey sort of throwback, and this turn of century sci-fi thing has been real popular and popularized by games like Fallout and the like. It was a really nice aesthetic. However, I do think taking so much away from the TV episode and having 1 or 2 flashbacks just did slow it down a little bit, because I really like what's going on with OB, what's going on at the TVA, and the climatic event that we have seen snippets of from episode 1. I'm just dying to see what happens there. So I felt like I was rushing myself through this episode, but at the same time, I loved what they were trying to do with it. I think they did it quite well.
Yeah, I agree. I think if this was like, and sometimes this is the case, and I think you could make a fair criticism of even Ahsoka. Disney Plus shows have a runtime problem, and I don't think they know what the correct runtime is. Because if this was an 8 or 10 episode season, I'd love this episode because we've so much left. But I agree that yeah, we kind of said beforehand in the first 2 episodes, this really works as like a workplace kind of caper and comedy. You know what I mean? So jumping away from that, again, yeah, I do agree. We kind of lost something, and we kind of lost we lost kind of the stakes. We kind of had to be reminded a couple of times. Even Loki at one stage, it was like, no, we have to get him back to the TVA because he has to save December. And we're like, oh yeah, oh, that's why they're here and that's what's going on. But having said that, this episode alone in a vacuum, just as 56 minutes of television, it kind of makes me contradict myself a little bit, because as much as I said last week that the show benefits when everyone just gets out of Loki's way and lets Tom Hiddleston run the show, this was almost the opposite, as he just kind of served to kind of move the plot along here. But we needed this episode. We needed kind of to get the kind of main antagonist back in. For me, it did a great job of kind of fleshing out where their mindsets were as we head into the back end of the season. It's actually the longest ever episode of Loki to date at 56 minutes, even longer than the season finale last year. But it didn't feel like it at any stage. It never kind of succumbed to that Marvel thing of either getting lost in kind of nonsense exposition or kind of major action scenes, while also telling us what we needed to know and keeping it in motion, exciting throughout. There was some amazing love and attention that I really appreciate. And just in general with this show, we've talked even about the end credits. Here we had the kind of old-timey piano music for the Marvels thing to open us up.
Brilliant.
Love it. Right in straight away. And again, this show just grabs me as soon as I start watching and doesn't let go. And then I'm like, that was an hour. I'm like, that's crazy. But I agree with what you're saying. My only complaint around this, and I'm going to sound a bit like Christopher Walken asking for more cowbell here, is that anytime they don't make OB a huge part of the episode, I'm going to say that I've got a fever and the only thing that can cure it is more OB. This is OB's show. He's the star. I love Tom Hiddleston, but like I need my fix at OB, and we just didn't get enough of him this episode. So I will stand for that. But overall, a grand hour of television. But yeah, if it was an 8 or 10 episode season, I'd absolutely adore it. But you kind of feel like we're ironically running out of time at times with this. It's like they were listening to us though last week when we said the show needs protagonists or antagonists, sorry, and we kick off with Renslayer, Miss Minutes, and Kang in the form of Victor Timely, and also like his childhood self. So we got them straight away. They got straight to the point. We kind of were saying that there may be a stakes problem, and again, I touched on that already, and I want to get your thoughts on the characters and their returns. But first off, I've got a really important question for you that I think we need to address up top in the show. If you were Victor Timely, who would you choose? Would it be Miss Minutes or Renslayer? Because there was a weird love triangle going on there.
Yeah, Miss Minutes is really starting to show that she could be one of the big bads of this episode, and she went a bit psycho bowling there at the end. So I don't know. I just, like Renslayer is methodical. She was his partner in the past. We are led to believe, as she was in the comics. A version of Renslayer was connected to Victor Timely, who was a Kang variant, if you want to call that, or one of his alternates. And yeah, so I just think if it came down to them, it's like Miss Minutes is starting to become like a pseudo horror-esque villain, and when is teaming up with that ever worked out for anyone? So that's yeah, it's gonna be Renslayer
Yeah,
to achieve
interesting.
my goals.
Okay, good stuff. What did you think of the guys coming back on there? I want to talk about Timely kind of separately, but Renslayer and Miss Minutes on a serious note, kind of their character arcs and the setups that we have, because I found it really interesting that like everyone in this show, there's almost a shades of grey to Renslayer. I expected it to be more villainous, but they've kept consistent with her character, and we don't really know her motivations. And Miss Minutes, again, we just got to see a lot more of her individualism. She wasn't so much a servile as she was in season one. So what were your thoughts on their kind of character arcs and how that sets up for the season? And again, of course, where they ended up at the end of time with Skeleton Kang.
Well, one thing I find about Renslayer, seeing as how you've said it, is that I've always found her character to be that cliche. Like I can't remember the character's name of Dracula, but the guy who Tom Waits played in the 90s when he was in the asylum, just like essentially being a herald of this person. And I feel like Renslayer's kind of fallen into that lackey sort of position. And because of that in season one, and now that continuing in season two, she doesn't pose much threat for me. Whereas we've seen and learned a lot more at Miss Minutes this episode. And I'm really starting to feel that she could be like, the henchman that need, or excuse me, the henchman, the villain that needs to be defeated in this episode to allow Kang's story to continue, to give us nice closure and a good guy versus bad guy dynamic, while not affecting where we're going in the story with Kang. So those two returns, that's kind of how I feel about them. I think Renslayer is staying on a very safe track, and Miss Minute's starting to become more of a character. But of course, like you said, this is the first time now that we've gotten to see a bit of an origin story for Kang.
Mm.
Which one thing that's interesting, I find contradicts the end of season Loki one. I don't think that's like a slip up on the writers' part. I think this is what's going on because we know that the Omega Kang started off in the 31st century. That's by no means 31st century, 1893. So something's going on. So this seems to be a massive plan to kind of use this timeline's Kang, the original version of He Who Remains, to become this new Kang trash. Now that like we've seen He Who Remains go, we've seen all the other Kang show up, we've seen Quantum Kang. We keep talking about this, but look, it looks like he's dead and that's safe now. It seemed like such a climatic thing because it felt like that was like the only Kang that was the proto Kang.
Yeah.
But now that we're starting to see almost a new origin story, and my God, it is laced with that proper sort of 12 Monkeys time travel confusion where you're watching it for the first time, you're like, what? I'm so lost. I can't formulate the timeline of this adventure true time in my head anymore. It just doesn't make sense because the Marvel really defines their time travel elements in Endgame. So it's great to see like kind of what they're doing with Kang, and it kind of bodes to what we were saying that like are they going to take the character in a completely different direction, like with the controversy with John Mayers and everything.
Yeah, and it's interesting one as well. I think just to kind of circle back and round off kind of Miss Minutes and Renslayer, it was I did find it very interesting. Like I loved the fact that they made this a love triangle is exactly the kind of weird decision I want this show to make and that I enjoy. Because it's just we'd never think of that, and it's so strange. But I do agree there are some inconsistencies, and I think part of that is just this is just mental and we just kind of have to go with a lot of it. But also I think we do have a new showrunner here. It was Michael Waldron who obviously created this show. It's since been passed to Eric Martin, who worked on season one, but now he's kind of taking the reins, and he has retconned a lot of the season one finale. Like, so for example, it looked like Loki was going to get stuck in the different dimension where no one knew who it was. That was just dealt with in episode one, and they haven't looked back on that. So I'm okay with that. But I think the takeaway from this is like, and the love story triangle and kind of Miss Minutes and Renslayer is, I think this episode shows that AI or not, like, as an old podcasting friend of mine once told me, never stick your dick in crazy. It's not going to go well. So it's just one of those things. And Victor Timely nearly learned that in the worst way. I want to touch on Timely as well, because he is obviously a comic book character and not one that I've kind of read much on myself. So I wanted to get your perspective on this portrayal of him. Obviously, you know, there's a lot of similarities that they have with Kang in the comic book again, but they have to kind of go their own way to fit into the overall MCU narrative. What were your thoughts on this? And also like how Jonathan Majors portrayed him as well.
So, like in the comics, Victor Timely is a very kind of lower tier version of Kang, and there is not a huge amount about him. So what they've done is they do have like a blueprint, but they've got a fresh slate as well. So what they did with Victor Timely here was they made him interesting. Now, the person he really reminded me of, and I hope that there's a connection here we find out about, is you remember the episode of Always Sunny in Philadelphia called Flowers for Charlie?
Yeah.
Where it gave Charlie the placebo, and at the end he showed up in the wheelchair. That was Victor Timely. So I'm saying it now. Always Sunny in Philadelphia. There is a Kang variant in that universe. I know the genius, ladies and gentlemen, but that is just the way it is. So yes, we know that Charlie is a Kang variant. So I'm very happy to establish that. But like Victor Timely was like, you know, your kooky sort of mad scientist character, and I think the stammer and everything he decided to lend to was really well. But I'm going to say now, going out on a limb here, don't see Victor Timely as being a villain in this going forward. He seems a little bit centric, seems a bit like, you know, I'm going to say arch, maybe conniving, but I have a feeling that he is going to try and do something that is going to be beneficial, either whether we fix the temporal loom, then have a moment of actually I have a lot of power here, and maybe get corrupted by that, do something he shouldn't have done, because the climax of Loki season 2 should be bridging that gap between the timelines, which is going to bridge a gap between the multiverse. Because that's obviously the way I see it, that you've got these like endless like springs of a loop that are like separated, and it's the variant timelines that are connecting them that create that bridge between the multiverse. And so far we've only seen a few ways of traveling, but this seems like it's probably going to open it up in the way we need it to open up, to work on the stories that are coming forward. Kang Dynasty, Secret Wars, even what they've been talking about they're doing with Deadpool. We need that bridge for every character to travel throughout it. And the whole idea of Multiverse of Madness was for Scarlet Witch to get her hands on this multidimensional traveling power, which it seems to be only what's it, America? What's the character's name?
Chavez.
America Chavez that has that power. So we need to open that up more, and that's obviously what they're going to do at the end of the season. So I don't see Victor Timely as being a bad guy. I see him as making a mistake and maybe repenting for it, but I also don't think he's going to see that character specifically is going to see through to the end of this series. I think he's definitely going to bite the bullet, but that's the great thing about Kang. You can keep killing them off and you don't get Return of Superman syndrome.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, we're gonna get multiple Kangs. This isn't gonna be the only Kang I think we get in this, because again, they promised us a reign of Kangs are gonna, and again they've shown us kind of the Council of Kangs. So to not give us that would be a massive anticlimax. And they have Jonathan Majors. It's not as if they have to hire a bazillion actors. It's the one guy who's already here. So I don't know. I kind of think that, and again, this could be a red herring. But I do think there was a lot of foreshadowing that he's going to be corrupted here in this episode. You saw kind of the discussion around Loki and Mobius, where Loki's like, this is literally the worst plan ever, bringing a variant of Kang into the TVA. He has the book, so he kind of has a base understanding of what the TVA does via the manual and so on. And his brain would have got to work. So you're essentially just throwing him in with all this technology. There were little bits where, you know, we had Sylvie and Loki's argument where, again, Sylvie was like, this is the person he is. And he may have been a good person, but we fucked with time. And now he is corrupted and a bad person. And hey, look, he's got a TVA novel. And then there was the bit where Renslayer and him were having a discussion. And again, there was the part where she told him who he became, and he's like, that sounds amazing, that's who I always kind of dreamed of being. And she's like, and the murders? And he just kind of was like, sorry, what's it say? And like, it's just like there's that kind of dread looming, and that could be just, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if next week we saw him do what he needs to do and then somehow get killed off, or Renslayer prunes him as she was kind of threatening to do this week. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw any of that and we just don't get that fleshed out version of Timely. And this was all just kind of you know, throwing kind of curveballs our way just to kind of keep us guessing. But there was definite signs here. It was obviously the first time also that we saw Jonathan Majors. It's the first time we've seen him in the movie since the allegations came out. We discussed last week. We're not going to get into any allegations discussion or anything like that, but we can discuss on the feeling that it has on us as a viewer and the impact. And again, we knew he was coming. This was no surprise. We got the obviously teaser in Ant-Man, and it was heavily advertised. They went out loud and proud like with it, because again, they just didn't want to upset anyone by keeping it as a surprise. So for me, like, my own thoughts were that I don't know, like, again, it's not that it ruins anything with Jonathan Majors. He's still a very talented actor. But he has a tendency in every role he plays, whether it's MCU or not, even you can see it in Creed 3 this year, he can almost overact in a way, and not in a bad way. Like, it is endearing in certain ways, and it works a lot of the time, and it definitely worked in the Loki season finale, but he always has to have a tick or a twist. And again, the stutter was very prevalent here, as kind of this variant's kind of unique selling point. But for me, I think where once I'd have kind of goodwill and kind of the willingness of me to want a Thanos style big bad in the MCU again, would have led me to love everything he did and every choice he made. I don't know if I'm as on board with everything Jonathan Majors. Like, there was a part of me that's like, I'd actually be okay if they did switch up Kang after all this. I'm not sold on it has to be Jonathan Majors, because he's so amazing. After this episode, he's so amazing. You'd lose a lot by not having him, and kind of feeling that regret for everything else that's going on outside. What were your own thoughts on watching him and kind of his portrayal?
It popped in my head as soon as he came on screen. I was like, okay, here we go. This is it. And it does feel a bit weird now that it's actually there. You know, I don't really know how I feel about it. I only actually finished watching the show not that long ago.
Yeah.
But because, like, I totally agree. You say, like, he is a very over actory, not in like a comedic way, like someone like Jim Carrey, but almost like Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon 1. It's like, why did you make those choices to be that hokey? But it was definitely like kind of strange seeing him on screen, and I don't know what they're going to do, and I suppose it depends on, like, you know, the conclusion of the investigation and everything that happens. But I mean, they've kind of backtracked on a lot of stuff before, like the Marvel Studios have. Could they change things up, like, significantly? Like, they could do very clever kind of work with what they're going to do, because we know the biggest issue is the Kang Dynasty, and if they hadn't slotted that name in, they probably provide themselves a bit of wiggle room. But how about, like, you know, like maybe San Diego next year, we get a new announcement. The Kang character's been killed off just because they decided it's the best thing to do. And what happens suddenly if the Kang Dynasty just, like, almost fizzles out like Thanos snap, and then suddenly we get the Doom Dynasty, which obviously would bring us very continually safely into Secret Wars. And of course, we know there's a few projects that have been announced. We assume one's going to be Spider-Man movie, one's going to be X-Men, possibly Spider-Man, and the other one's probably going to be Fantastic Four. So with them established in the MCU multiverse, there is still room to get out of it, because yeah, I just don't know how I feel about it. And I think just going forward, I think a lot of it will pivot on this, and maybe that's another reason why Miss Minutes suddenly all of a sudden seems like that she's going to get to the point of being a serious contender for chief antagonist in this season. Maybe it's a bit of like damage control or something, so they can even use like John Majors a lot less until they get to where they need to get with him.
Yeah, and I've seen theories out there where, again, people have spoken about potentially Renslayer could come in as the new Kang. You could recast Hunter B-15. There's a lot of moves they can make, but again, like, I think what was interesting for me here is that I'm like, yeah, I'd actually be okay with it. I'd live. Do you know what I mean? In the same way that we spoke about when we were speaking about Ahsoka, it was going to be tough now that Ray Stevenson has passed after such an amazing performance as Beta Skull, and that you're like, no one else can play him. I really don't feel that with Kang. I'm like, whatever you want to do, I'll go with it, because I understand kind of the situation. we touched on one of the debates there, and what I love about this show and why the finale was such a runaway success and why people loved it is that it doesn't always have to default back to action, action, action. And you're just lining up our heroes on this side, our bad guys on that side. And the last episode is just mash them all together in one big Marvel style battle where you're like, just wake me up when it's over. Like, tell me who won and like give me a post credit scene and I'm grand. This show is so much about conversations and theories and just opposing viewpoints, similar but opposing viewpoints that just fracture kind of characters that we like Loki and Sylvie, but also even with Mobius and Renslayer. Like, again, they're two characters that have, like, they both essentially want to preserve the TVA, but just for very different reasons. They're very similar motivations. You sense there's common ground there. You sense there's a friendship and they still care for each other. Even in that scene where they kind of spoke for each other, they're just on slightly different sides of an ideology. And even you think back to like stuff like you hear like civil wars, like the Irish Civil War, brother fought brother, and again it's just like they're just tiny, they just disagree on one issue, but it drives such a wedge that the entire multiverse can explode. Loki and Sylvie very similar, where Loki's like, yeah, we need to preserve the TVA, and she's like, well, the TVA's never really operated for good. There's no right answer here because we don't know enough about the plot to be able to make up our mind, but I love that. What are your thoughts on these ideologies? So it's kind of breaking down into Loki versus Sylvie and now Mobius versus Renslayer. Like, who is there any that you're siding with? Is there any kind of way that you're leading? One character is right versus the other, or kind of how are these kind of fractures sitting with yourself?
Well, the characters are all kind of still going on theory. I mean, there's a lot of question marks attached to the science of the TVA. So we don't know who's going to be right. Like, it's just like all based on opinion and emotion right now, which is never the correct way to act. But I'm obviously the whole task of this show is for us to side with the chief protagonists. So obviously in that case, it's going to be Mobius and Loki. I think they're doing a fine job of that. I do have to say I find the Renslayer and the Sylvie stuff, which we keep touching on, almost the point that it's more frustrating now. Like, they need stakes. I get that. But I think what everyone liked that really dug the Loki Sylvie ship stuff last season was the fact that the characters did grow together, and this season they're completely opposed to each other. I mean, is it going to be some strange, tragic romance? Is that what they're building to? Is that the purpose of all this? So I think that's why that just stakes for the sake of stakes, I'm finding a little bit frustration.
Okay.
So that's why, like, I still think the characters of Renslayer and Sylvie are just not doing it for me at the moment.
Okay.
But I do think we could probably see this go somewhere. And I like your idea because there is obviously the whole thing that Renslayer is going to be a Kang variant the way Sylvie is a variant of Loki. And that just leads to your theory about if they really wanted to go forward, maybe they could do it this way.
Interesting. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and again, they definitely do need to be fleshed out as more than just opposing forces for our two main characters in Loki and Mobius. But also kind of what I love about this show is just it allows time for character. Like, they had like little, not on the little off subject, but like there was little character beats in this, like that they made time for, even with such an urgent kind of ongoing kind of scene kind of playing out in front of us. Like, Mobius always makes time for food because he just loves the different areas that he goes to. So he's like, I want to try the food here. Like, I want to see what's like even when he's in the TVA, he loves his key lime pie. He's just a foodie. And he just wants to like see the world or see the multiverses and experience it. Or you had Loki with the statues and just being like, Thor wasn't that tall. And he just has that little bit of spite that's still there. He's a good guy now. He's definitely a hero, but like, it's still his brother, and he still has that little bit of jealousy that he always will have, and brothers always do have. In terms of kind of the arguments and the fractures, I think I'm getting the sense that Sylvie's going to be right here over Loki, and that it's going to end up being a bit of a tragedy, and that Sylvie will end up going along with Loki, because he just seems to have more conviction and confidence, and he has a direction through the TVA. But again, like, you got to ask yourself, what is the TVA? What's their purpose? Like, they've turned around and they've said, oh no, now we're here to stop people pruning the timelines. And they're just the antithesis of what they used to be. I fear for the future of the TVA, although protect OB at all costs. Like whatever happens, OB's got to make it out. I think at the end of it, though, we're going to look back and be like, oh no, you should have done what Sylvie said. Like again, you should have just killed all the Kang variants. Like with Victor Timely, I have a feeling that that's going to really backfire, and they were warned about it. And Sylvie was like, I'm telling you, this is a terrible fucking idea. Bringing Khan to the TVA is not the solution. And sometimes when you're desperate and you're in that position of need, the worst solution becomes the only solution, especially when you are a fractured character like Loki or Mobius. Your decision making is skewed. Whereas Sylvie, she is reacting emotionally, but again, she also is seeing things very clearly in the Kang's evil, kill him. So there's that too. Renslayer, I do find that arc interesting. I do find her interesting. I like how they kept her consistent with her season 1 character. I didn't want her, I suspected they might, but I didn't want her to go to just be a murderous psychopath just because she picked a lane and was a heel here and was confirmed at the end of season 1. She's still the exact same character. And what I like about her is she's the best kind of heel. She's the heel who believes she's the good guy and doing the right thing. And she has conviction in what she wants to do. And another thing that you could kind of see here, and it's very subtle, and they didn't spend too much time on it, but you could, Mobius loves her. And we got that in season 1. That was pretty obvious. Even if she doesn't feel the same, and he's more of a means to an end and a friend zone type of guy. But what got me wondering is, at the end of this all, we kind of feel like we know the last scene of this will probably be Mobius waving to Loki on a jet ski. You know what I mean? I'm wondering, is Renslayer going to be on the jet ski with her? I'm like,
Possible.
yeah, I'm because like they're setting up Renslayer versus Miss Minutes, and is Miss Minutes going to be the big bad? Which does that make Renslayer the enemy of my enemy is my friend? So I'm liking this. I have to say I do like the dynamics and the fact that we've no idea who's right. We got a few little Easter eggs here, like we got the old timey piano, we got the likes of Odin, Thor, and Balden.
Balder, yeah.
Balder, sorry, was that
Yeah.
a big Easter egg for you, or was there any other Easter eggs you picked out here? That
It's interesting because the way Loki talked about him, the Balder character was originally featured in these Tales of Asgard shorts that were at the start of the original Tales of Mystery comics, which I'm a big fan of that period of comics, the late Silver Age. And the Balder comics were usually featured at the start of the end of those issues, and they were just incredibly frustrating to read. And it was all these like stories about Balder is going to go to look after a twig today, and it's like, like I want to see like Thor, like spinning into the center of the earth or any out of that other like golden Silver Age awesomeness. But you always had to get through the Balder story in the Age of Asgard. So I think that was probably a relation to the fact that the fans never really liked this pacifist god, and he does go on to play a more prominent role in like the golden modern age stuff. Nothing major. He's just like a character there. But like the little nod to Balder was good, considering that there was that leak about, I can't remember who was playing it. Daniel Craig was supposed to be Balder in. That was the theory in. I can't remember. I think it was either Multiverse of Madness or it wasn't Quantumania. It could have been something on.
right.
I think they theorized it around WandaVision because there was that picture leaked, which you don't know if it's real or fake, of Daniel Craig done as Balder. So that was interesting, and is that foreshadowing as well, because we know that there is going to be a connection now in the Marvels with the Asgardians based on the TV spot. So I think it's a bit of a reach. I think it was just a dig at those old comics. But yeah, I really like those little touches. I think that fan service in a medium like this is incredibly important, way more than it is in like anything else, because it almost says to the hardcore fans who are very much their own entity, look, there's still something here for you. Just that little acknowledgement, that tip of the hat is really, really important. So I really always appreciate that stuff.
I think it's that stuff that keeps us coming back. You know what I mean? This is something where Kevin Feige, whatever you say about him, and maybe he has too much on his plate, maybe he's too ambitious, or maybe he just achieved so highly with Endgame that he should have quit while he was ahead. Whatever you say about him, though, he is a massive, massive Marvel Comics fan, and he loves this shit. And he's one of the hardcores himself, and he wants to celebrate that. So it wasn't that. I like, again, look, he's the Poochie of that universe. You know what I mean? And I like it was like fucking Balder. So I enjoyed that. Next week we move into Kang being back in the TVA in the form of Victor Timely. Again, the question is kind of, can he be trusted? And kind of what awaits Renslayer and Miss Minutes at the end of time. Any theories? Again, this is a show that's very tough to theorize around, but the temporal loom, is it going to go boom, or is that
Everyone's going boom. That's what I feel. I just think it's important. I can't see everything wrapping up in the season 6. I'll need and tie it into a bundle, and then we go into the Marvels, and it's its own thing. We know this is going somewhere important, so it's what they do. We've always gone nuts with the theories so far. I don't think Nightcrawler is going to run in at the last moment and save the day. I think, yeah, we're going to get a self-contained story what we have here, but what's going to happen afterwards is going to be where the fun really comes in. Like, maybe we'll get another little when the multiverses merge or something like that. So, but that's where I think it's going. I think it's important for them to open up this part. We're at the end of or start of the second act of this whole saga. So we need to see that like peril come back in the form of whatever's going to happen at the end. And it looks like it's going to be the temporal loom going boom.
Interesting. I think for next week, I'm like, I think it's going to be a powerful impact on Renslayer. Like we Miss Minutes knows that Kang died. Renslayer only learned it in this episode. I think it's going to be a big impact to see. Like, it's kind of like that quote that we had in episode 1 where it's like, all your gods are dead. And Renslayer is going to literally seeing the corpse of the person that she worshipped. I think that's going to put doubt in her mind about whether she was worshipping a false god. Whereas we know Miss Minutes is still all in. She's trying to just enact his plan B in case that happens. So I think that's where that fracture starts to begin. And I also think as well, like, look, for now they're obviously going to preserve the temporal loom just because we know there's 3 episodes left. And but I think we're going to get that moment. I don't think Victor Timely is going to become all of a sudden go full Kang in this, but I think we're going to get that moment where he just steals something or just takes something and no one else realizes it. And again, like, it's just that little glint in his eyes where it's like, yeah, this might have been a mistake. So looking forward to it as always, though, because this show can go literally anywhere, and we really don't have a fucking clue at any stage. But that's part of the fun, and we'll be back to discuss it anyway. Before we wrap up, I do want to touch on it because we're recording this on Friday, the 20th of October, which is a date a lot of Marvel fans will have had circled in their calendar. We're not a video game podcast, but it would be remiss to discuss it if I'm chatting with one of the people who is probably the biggest Spider-Man fan I know on this planet at this stage. So obviously Spider-Man 2 is coming out, the sequel to obviously Marvel's original Spider-Man by Insomniac Games, and then the follow-up Miles Morales. Dan, I want to get your thoughts. Like, are these games as huge for you? Are these as pivotal for you as they are for a lot of Spider-Man fans? Or as a hardcore, like, is it something where there are bits that, like, it's not my Spider-Man? Like, where are your thoughts and how are you feeling, like, around the first 2 games?
Yeah, so like Insomnia did a great job in creating their own Spider-Man, which has been, made canon now, as we've seen in the last Spider-Man movie. So the Insomnia Spider-Man does exist in that universe. And I think they did a really good job in the first 2 of really kind of bringing a lot of the stuff that I felt about the original 94 cartoon into the computer game world. And then the other thing that a little bit Spider-Man is the Todd McFarlane run back in the 90s as well. Where he really invented that style we know now going forward of like Spider-Man. It doesn't just like swing like in the John Romita Junior comics or in that sort of era that like there's a dance to it, and they created that perfectly in this game. And you really everything you always imagined being like Spider-Man when you were a kid, and you could only imagine what it was like to like race through the streets of New York in ways they did capture that perfectly. And as much as I kind of like messed around with the first game, I couldn't say I played the Miles Morales game. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought the combat was great. I have this just unusual memory. We experienced a lot of glitches in that game when we first played it. So I think there was one entire round where a vinyl record from one of the cutscenes was stuck through Miles' hand while he was still like swinging out of the building. It was just really weird. It's weird that stands out, but I love the design. I love that they've kind of like Tony Starkified it. And this always happens in movies to comic books. And obviously now Insomnia have showed us it happens in games where when The Dark Knight was such a big success, they really changed Joker in the comics. They've done that a big deal with the Scarlet Witch, and then it's become so popular. And I feel that the modular suit Spider-Man from Civil War and going forward into Endgame and beyond, that Spider-Man has worked its way very much into the feel of the Insomnia games. So I'm very excited about it because I'm a big Venom fan, and the first run of Venom was, in my opinion, one of the only times they got him right. It's a very unusual character because everyone thinks he's awesome. It's like the Ninja Turtles or He-Man, where as a massive Ninja Turtles fan myself, out of 166 episodes, there's about 5 good episodes, and it's the same with He-Man as well. Venom's very much like that as well. I think when they first wrote him, he was absolutely incredible. Just before the Lethal Protector and the Maximum Carnage timeline, he was genuinely scary. And what they seem to be doing with the alien symbiote suit in this is they're going a slightly different route, which maybe it's inspired by what could happen in Secret Wars, because we know Peter Parker and the symbiote are in one universe now, and it'll be a different way of doing everything. But the way they've done Venom in this, like, I take a few little issues with the design, but the character, we've only seen him in shadows and stuff like that. We've only seen him lurking. The powers seem to be gone really OP. So I'm interested to see where they go with this. I definitely think I'm going to pick it up because it contains a lot of characters I like. I really like what they're doing with Craven the Hunter, and I think that's going to be like, a good kind of background story to another retelling of the alien symbiote story. So I'm looking forward to checking it out. I'll start with some streams, and if the game captivates me, I will run out and get a copy.
Interesting stuff. Storyline wise, like, I've taken the weekend off work so I can play it. I love it. These are some of my favorite games ever. And story wise as well, this has become, just because there's so much of it, and you get to spend so much time in the universe, and they take such time to allow emotional beats. Like, you go on missions that, again, you're not in any real peril. You're just allowed to experience what day-to-day life is for Peter and Miles. These have become my headcanon for what Spider-Man is. Although, like, look, you're always going to look into the different kind of, the movies, the comics, the TV series, and so on. And you're going to have a certain affinity for each one. But I love this. This has become my Peter Parker. I love what they're building towards with Miles, and I love kind of the fact that a lot of this seems to have been set up in the first game, and they're going to pay it off, particularly the Norman Osborn kind of stuff and Harry and so on. I love the gameplay of this. It's, at the same time, it's one of the most fun experiences I've ever had playing a video game. Like, just being able to chill and just, like, it's so relaxing and therapeutic. If you've had a hard day's work, just go swinging around New York City and just go, like, fight some, like, low level crimes and kick some people's arses. Like, the gameplay, I don't think any of us could believe how right they got the gameplay, because, again, it harkens back to, like you say, those expectations you have of a kid when Spider-Man first captured your imagination. You're like, they will never be able to recreate that because it is just too cool in my head. And there you are in the game. You're like, this is it. You did it. It's actually cooler. Like, even the fighting styles, the way, like, the combos and stuff, it never gets button mashy either, but it kind of has that super speed stuff, but you know what you're doing throughout, and you're always kind of conscious of it. It's amazing. But also as well, it's kind of, it can be whatever you want it to be. And I love the fact that you can kind of opt in. You can have 3 hours of just swinging around New York City if that's what you need, because you've had a hard day's work and you just want to switch off. If you want to get into the story, it can get really intense, and it kind of steps up to the moment every single time when you need to. But also, what I love about it is, unlike some games, it's never off-puttingly difficult. Do you know when a game is just, oh, I can't fucking get this, what's wrong with this? You know what I mean? It doesn't baby you. It's challenging, but it's never like, it never tries to fuck you over. And it's like, only really good gamers will be able to play this level. And it's like, no, like, it should be, if I put enough work in, if I've played enough, I'm able to do it. You know what I mean? Because I want to know what the story goes, but still being challenging, so I don't feel like I'm just destroying everyone either. I loved Miles as well. I thought that was a perfect kind of side dish game, and just an accoutrement to keep us over for the sequel. Miles is just, like, again, I've never really did much with Miles until Spider-Verse came out. But, like, again, the name of this is Into the Spoilerverse, which tells you how highly I kind of rate, like, Miles. Yeah. He's my Spider-Man. I can't wait to see him in live action MCU, which I think we're going to, but another discussion for another day. and they've really built him up as the main character. And the fact that in the second game, they probably made him more fun to play as than Peter Parker had been in the original game, which I just didn't think was possible. But little stuff like the Venom punches, which again just gets confusing now that we have actual Venom in here, and the invisibility and stuff, and those little touches and differences and the attention to detail. So I'm really excited to play it. Like, full disclosure, 12 o'clock last night, I was playing it like the second it came online. And it is like, it's instantly epic. I won't get into any plot details or any spoilers, and we'll save discussing the game for another time. But it is exactly what you want it to be and more. And it's an upgrade on the PS5, but it's not like, you know, the way some games that you love could get upgrades on new consoles, and you're like, it doesn't really feel the same. And it's like, it is cool, but like, I just like that game so much. No, the upgrades work, and it's like, okay, good. The power scaling works. It doesn't just kind of set you back at being similar to Jedi Survivor early in the year. It doesn't kind of set you back at the start. We have to learn all your tricks again. You can kind of do all the tricks, but they advance on that as well. But I've also, like, I can see that this story is going to be incredible. Like, in the little bursts I've had, because I haven't played much of the story yet. I just want to be in the world again and kind of just look at what this looks like in PS5 on a big screen. And this kind of extended New York. There's 3 boroughs now, whereas when you had 1 in either the first game. So the world is huge. And I've full faith in Insomniac to just take it home. And it's really nice having a game. Like, I don't know, every other game that I play, when a new edition comes out, I'm like, I really hope it's not shit. And we just know that it's not going to be. And so far, what I've played, what I've experienced, I already know it's not. So it's just amazing to be back in this world. And look, we will discuss, if you end up picking it up, we will kind of touch back on it as time goes on over the next few weeks. But of course, we're here to discuss Loki, and it is always a pleasure to discuss it with you, Dan. We'll pick back up next week as you enter the second half of the season. It's nearly fucking over already.
But we'll have the Marvels right after.
We do have the Marvels right after. Okay, we have loads to discuss, but in such a short burst of time. But Dan, always a pleasure to have you on. Always interesting, always insightful. I always feel like I learn whenever you're on the show. So thank you as always, and we shall chat to you next week.